Okay, perfect timing. So for the next session, I would like to, welcome you all to the working group summary. So yesterday afternoon, all of this, guy organized the working group. They spent 5 hours, having an interactive discussion about that topics. And then now they're going to have 5 minutes each to provide summary about 5 hours of working time that they did yesterday. So please, the first working group.
Hello. Hi, I'm Steve Rosemergy. I hosted the session on Agile Software Development with Sue Mobasser. We actually had a great turnout. As you can see, we had about 45 people show up. I don't think we could get all the names on one page, but in the backup charts, you'll see the remaining names. We had a great turnout, a great discussion, and here's the overview of what we discussed. We kind of gave a real quick overview of Agile software development to kind of level set everyone on the topic. And then we talked about some of the challenges. And so I presented a case study of work I did in industry and showed where you can have challenges with respect to scaling Agile software development practices to large organizations and large efforts. And that helped to stimulate discussion around challenges and with Agile software development at large. And it allowed us to share findings from a variety of sources, both from the government as well as contractors. So some of the key takeaways that the entire working group came up with as kind of suggestions for work ahead is making sure that the Acquisition 101 accounts for Agile software development and having training available for both acquirers and developers. And the next item we have here is supporting collaboration and creating an infrastructure for collaboration. Currently in a lot of acquisition environments, there's a lot of firewalls between the acquirer and the developer, and there was a lot of discussion around breaking down those barriers and creating an infrastructure for collaboration. Also, requirements was a huge discussion because there's a lot of upfront design, a lot of upfront requirements development in many programs today, and everyone discussed how there are many challenges with respect to evolving requirements along the life cycle of the program in light of problems that you uncover along the way. And then we had open discussions with respect to what contractors and government representatives see as challenges on either side of the fence. And then challenges with respect to source selection. And this is in part what helped stimulate this discussion was the fit check tool, which is this item that we discussed at 3:30. Sue Mobasser and several folks from industry have collaborated to develop a fit check tool to help enable programs to assess organizational commitment, both on the government side, the contractor side, as well as program attributes to assess the fit of Agile software development methods with programs. So this stimulated a lot of discussion. Sue was able to get a lot of feedback from industry and from government with respect to how to fine-tune this tool. And of course, along the way, we got quite a number of people to assist us with kind of peer reviewing the tool. So for those of you who didn't attend this particular session and are very interested in Agile software development because there were so many great topics during this time, feel free to take a look at the charts that are in the chart package. And if you have questions and would like to collaborate with us further, feel free to reach out to us. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to the next.
My name is Brian Johnson. I worked on this workshop with DJ Byrne. He's out here in the audience. We actually had a great time with this workshop. We were able to engage a lot of different perspectives, presented by the teams that we would want to consider part of the presentation team, not just myself and DJ. The goals that we had set out for this, benchmarking with peer organizations, which is why we were so interested in hearing the perspectives or the experience from the other organizations that are going through the cyber defense challenge. How do you go about protecting your assets? That's really what we were focused on. The defense of our systems, not so much being focused on cybersecurity. It's kind of like our OMB example of identities being stolen. That issue is that boat has already sailed, so to speak. So now we need to figure out how do we deal with our systems in a way where we can operate through intrusions, through attacks. We also wanted to look at what are the gaps that we have in our existing process. By comparing what we do with other organizations, learning what they have tried, experimented with, what has not been successful, allows all of us to help elevate our position in being able to defend ourselves. Also, over the long run, looking at how do we keep current? How do we remain relevant in our defenses? The rapid rate of change is something that I think our adversaries are better at than we are in terms of being able to defend our systems. So by being able to work with each other and collaborate on how we're defending our systems, how we're designing and implementing our mitigations is going to be key for us to be successful in the future. We're also interested, of course, in the lessons learned, and that's how we can learn from each other's errors, or at least those failures, and we don't all have to experience the exact same issues there. The other key element there was how to engage our management. Selling the idea of cyber to management is a difficult thing. You're looking at the investment into something so that an event doesn't happen. So you're trying to buy down risk. How do we engage management so that they understand that we're not just trying to build an empire that is pulling away from their science objectives for a particular project? So this is something that we all are grappling with, is what is this return on investment type of concept? It's a challenge. We also were interested in what metrics could be used, which metrics were successful for folks already. As it turns out, this is something that was of broad interest to all of us. So while I had mentioned the presenters, DJ and I had organized this, really it was everybody in the workshop that was making this successful. It was not a one-way presentation. It was a dialogue. That's what made this thing the most successful and also the most engaging for us. The lively discussion here, and I'm going to pick up on a comment that DJ also made, when we looked at all the various workshops, there was a lot of interesting topics, but he said one of the things that was maybe a standout for us is we may have had some of the best looking participants as well. So we appreciate that. Key points that we basically brought to light in this whole process is there are standards. As mentioned in some of the other open sessions, these are standards that are produced by either the NIST, the Special Publications, or the ISO 27000 series that are actually, as we discussed, deemed to be useful. So while they are also required, they're also helping us improve our security. It's not something that is detracting from it. So that was a good thing to find. The fact that we've got to have not only those requirements, but how they're integrated into our whole life cycle. Whether this is agile development, waterfall development, it's got to be something that's integrated in from the beginning. It's got to be a part of our design, our whole development process. Absent that, we try and do the typical bolt-on after the fact, and it just doesn't work out. Other things would be like reviewing logs. We tend to put out a requirement that pushes these things down to very low levels. And those sometimes mean that it gets pushed to a spot where they don't have context of what it is that they're looking at. So we need to be considerate of how we're applying the requirements and how we're allocating those responsibilities is really the key message on that. And as I mentioned before, the business case, how we're engaging management, this is something that seems to be a common thread that we still need to work on. How do we quantify that likelihood that this event is going to occur? We're also now starting to see more security-specific artifacts that are included in the reviews. This is positive. Do we have the right artifacts that are in the reviews? Are those in the correct point in our review process? Are we being responsive enough to change to be able to account for that? Still things that we need to work. So conclusion that I'm going to go through rapidly here. Cyber threats are changing. Our mitigations, however, have a very short half-life. So the adversary is moving faster than we are. Nobody had a full solution to the cyber threat problem, so there's plenty of work to go. There are a variety of approaches. Since my time is up here, I'm going to move through that can be addressed. We can continue to work on the standards. We need to work as a community to help resolve this. I think we can be very successful if we are able to share information. I know there were some challenges with being able to participate in that process, so that's something we need to continue to work on. And also metrics to help us so that we know that we're measuring effectiveness adequately. So thank you.
All right, so I'm Ryan Noguchi. We had a very productive discussion yesterday on model-based systems engineering primarily. Rob Pettit wasn't able to make it this year, so we didn't have as much discussion on model-based software engineering as we have in the past. But basically what we wanted to talk about are, as I discussed at the preview, what are the kind of the enablers that MBE provides to cope with rapid change in the environment, and how are the methods and practices of MBE affected by some of those change drivers. And we talked quite a bit also about collaboration, and we feel that kind of the time is right to start building some more specific collaborative opportunities within the GSAW community to try to address some of these upcoming issues. So I'll talk about that in the next couple of slides. But basically, we talk quite a bit about the enablers that MBE has that offers to programs to cope with change. And a lot of programs, a lot of organizations that have been piloting model-based systems engineering techniques for several years now are starting to see the fruits of that labor be realized. You're starting to see the benefits of the reuse of models and the use of that structure that they spent quite a bit of NRE building these models and building in flexibility into those models. And now when they're looking at the second satellite in the series, or they're looking at the upgrades to that program, now they're starting to see substantial, huge savings in time and resources to now address that next phase and next increment of the program. So we're seeing a lot of interest in tightly integrating a lot of analysis disciplines and techniques and tools using the models that are at the heart of MBSE to kind of drive this tightening of the OODA loop, the tightening of the loop from identifying a change or some kind of problem that's occurring, a change in requirements, a change in technologies, and seeing what impact that has on the rest of your system by using this model as a means to now navigate this network of dependencies and interrelationships. We talked quite a bit about a lot of the challenges that we're seeing in broader, larger scale adoption of model-based techniques. We're seeing, we see a lot of the benefits at a tactical level, but there are a lot of challenges to adoption and institutionalization at on a broader scale. And so these are some of those challenges that we see are still out there that we need to work through in order to push this forward as a more mainstream technique within our domain. As we heard elsewhere, in other domains like the automotive industry and other industries, they're well ahead of us. They've already adopted this. They see the ROI. It's a no-brainer to them. This community is still starting to kind of work through the pilot projects and understanding the benefits and the costs and the challenges. And so I think we still have a little bit of a ways to go. But one of the things that we see as a big enabler of moving forward is really getting some better engagements with some of those other domains and seeing what they have to offer, bringing them to GSAW to present some of their capabilities, some of their experiences and best practices in their domains. But yeah, so there's a lot of upfront costs in building this model and building flexibility into it, but we're starting to see a lot of substantial benefits in doing so. Let's see. Avenues for collaborations. We talked quite a bit about the time potentially being ripe for some collaboration within the GSAW community outside of the GSAW once a year kind of process. And we thought about some of the opportunities that for doing so, maybe as part of a CCSDS activity, or within COSI, with the OMG, if we're talking about language standards, with DTIC. We want to explore some of these options and see which of these, maybe multiples of these, would be the best opportunities to start engaging in closing on some of these issues and concerns with regard to the sharing of models, the sharing of information that's captured in these models to better enable this kind of this new environment where we're building these systems is as services that are not just a single prime now in charge of everything. So we want to, these are some of the things that we talked about potentially collaborating on, a reference architecture, on ontology. Everyone talks about the OSI stack, and we know what that means because there's a standard out there that everyone understands. We may need to kind of generate some of that within this community. There are a lot of barriers to collaboration we think can be improved upon or helped by exploiting some of these opportunities with some of these other organizations to take advantage of the infrastructure they have in place. Let's see, other things we suggested for next GSAW, kind of bringing in some of the ideas from outside of this community, particularly the automotive, transportation, and other industries that are far along in this. And we're also here at SMC and Aerospace, we're planning on a focus day on MBSE so later this year with potentially a tool fair with the various MBSE tool vendors to kind of get some of that knowledge and capability out there to the community. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so Ramesh and I did this 6th edition of the Cloud Systems working group, and in terms of the overall goals of what we were looking at, obviously we wanted to look at the state of the art and the state of the possible for cloud computing and big data, because those are basically sort of going together at this point in time. The way we basically structured this in the first half is that we had a series of talks from folks in industry, and in the second half we had a panel that morphed into just a large, wide-ranging discussion between the panelists and the audience. We actually had panelists posing questions to the audience about the different aspects of what does it mean to manage exabytes of data in a ground system, and then also how to manage all of the ground system functionality in this on-demand environment. So there's certainly lots of ins and outs that went along with that. This was basically the structure of the actual agenda. I don't necessarily want to just read through this, word for word, but we did have presentations from Tom Vanek from Booz Allen, Mehran Sakrati from ESA, Rich Baker from Solars, and Dan Crichton from NASA. After that, after the break, after the cookies, we had this discussion that was moderated by Christian Walsh, who supports NOAA back east, along with all the folks that are there. This discussion went so well and was so lively that we basically sort of ran out of time of actually having a real demo at the end of some of the Federation management stuff that was going on. But I was not disappointed because there was actually a lot of key points and topics that came out of the discussion that I feel are good that they're gaining recognition. So in terms of new technologies that are gaining recognition, I mean, certainly cloud data services in terms of how you manage terabytes and exabytes of data. How do you change a column in a database when you have just enormous amounts of data that would be affected? In terms of containers, there was discussion earlier in some of the talks about virtual machines versus container. There's certainly trade-offs between how big they are, how heavyweight they are, how easy they are to manage, what kind of operating system dependencies that you would have or not have. But it certainly offers a good compromise in a number of ways for those kinds of aspects. Certainly microservices and microservices architecture is something that is important in how you design these systems. When you talk about a cloud is really just a collection of services. So to have a set of microservices within those other cloud services, it's all in a service architecture. In terms of new tools that are gaining popularity, Chef, Pup, and Salt were all mentioned. These are all configuration management tools that when you have a very large cloud environment that is managing multiple missions, you don't want to have to manage all these things by hand. So having the configuration management tools is very not only useful, it's actually becoming critical. We had systems that were demonstrated or had presentations on them that were on private, public, and hybrid clouds. And also in terms of the need for federation management, these were all essentially quotes or direct paraphrases from all of the talks. I did not make up these topics here, these last 4 bullets. So the notion of the integration of data from different missions and agencies, the virtual integration of distributed archives, federated data access, and also hybrid clouds. These are all instances of needing federation management. And for the folks that know me, I spend a lot of time working on this, so I found this particularly gratifying that there is this wider recognition of the need for federation technologies. So, in terms of the conclusion and outstanding challenges, cloud is certainly an enabler of a rapid rate of change. Outstanding challenges, how do you manage performance in a multi-mission environment? You know, how do you avoid the noisy neighbor problem? How do you achieve and manage system accreditation in a cloud environment? Accreditation in some ways depends on just being able to lock down your exact configuration, but that's sort of antithetical to an on-demand cloud environment. So possibly there is the accreditation process will have to change to allow, you know, configuration change but within a known constraint. How to evaluate when to rehost, refactor, or rebuild your system as you're going to a cloud is an outstanding issue that everybody's going to have to deal with. As part of that, you might have to say, well, you know, what's the minimum lead time? What's the impact on my budget and schedule for having to adopt, you know, cloud technologies in terms of, you know, how much refactoring or rebuilding that you're going to have to do? Those can decide whether you're actually going to go to a cloud or not. And then finally, I wanted to mention, you know, well, how to avoid, you know, silos as a service. If you don't actually look at some of these federation technologies in terms of identity management and resource management, then it's just going to be silos, you know, all over again. So with that, I'll pass it on.
Thank you. I'm going to stand up because I'm not quite as organized as you are and I can't see otherwise. So hi everyone, my name is Wayne Burke from NASA JPL. I co-chaired with Vail Sather from the Aerospace Corporation a discussion on open source, and it was really interesting, actually. This is my first time at GSAW, and there's certainly been a lot of discussion about open source, and I've had a lot of people come and say, I wish I could go to your session, but the other sessions are also interesting as well. So we ended up with about 25 people that were really engaged in the discussion. So our goals were mostly just to provide a space to begin the discussion, sort of a formal discussion, or semi-formal in our case, discussion of open source within the ground systems community, and share lessons that we have learned, as well as get some questions answered that we brought into the discussion. So we ran this as an unconference, a sort of a mini unconference. Has anyone heard of an unconference before? Okay, 3 people. All right. Basically, you bring people together around a specific issue, and then you give them the opportunity to propose sessions based on questions they have, case studies they want to present, information that they think other people may be interested in, whatever it may be. And so with these 25 people, oh, there's our names again, we had 10 different sessions. We basically broke the time up into about 3 periods of about an hour long each, and people got together to have discussions in groups of between 3 and 10. So because there was so much discussion and so much information that came out of that, we actually, in the PowerPoint, created a single slide for each discussion. And I haven't actually looked at the summations because I did not type the notes for this. But I'm going to run through fairly quickly each of these and just kind of get an overview. If you want more information, that's why we put it all in the PowerPoint, because it will be available. And of course, feel free to reach out to us as well if you want to be connected with the people who were in the session, or you just have further issues around open source. So the first one was open source software lessons learned. So Vail at Aerospace has been studying open source for a while. And so she shared some of the things that they have learned and got some additional feedback from the group that came together. And unfortunately, with like 2.5 minutes, I'm going to have to go fairly quickly through these. Is there anybody out there finding open source practitioners within the workplace? So how do you find other people at where you work that also do open source so that you can begin to build a community inside? Involving cross-domain contributions and building community. If you're working on an open source project, how do you reach out to find people in other domains that can assist you in making your project more effective? And what are sort of the fundamentals that you need in order to build a community around that project externally? Open source software security and assurance, obviously a very big issue, especially in this community. How do you make certain when you are using external software that you can actually verify that it is secure. Ball Aerospace Cosmos. This is a product for, it's open source ground systems software, if I remember correctly. I apologize, I didn't sit in this session. But they discussed how they had put this together, how they had released it into the community, how many contributions they'd had. It was really basically a case study of how you can take a product and put it out there and gain benefit from that. Low side development, high side deploy. If you are working in a classified environment, but you want to gain the benefits of open source by having people on the outside contribute to your project, how do you set that up? How do you have something on the outside where there's an external community, but you're really using it internally and make certain that you're gaining benefit from both of those things? The sociology of open source. This was rather interesting. It, of course, ties into why do people do open source, what is the value of open source, commonalities between the way open source functions, as well as, this was run by Dave Mittman at NASA JPL. He has seen commonalities in the way JPL is structured across the entire campus. Buyer's remorse. If you decide to do open source, whether that's consuming open source or you are producing a product that you're trying to open source, and you get into that, you decide that's not the right path for you, how do you change to do something else? And so there's a discussion of, if a product reaches an end of life, how do you shut it down? And there's actually discussion from this session of pulling together a paper to publish this, because it seemed to be a very interesting topic that within this community or within sort of more formal communities, there hasn't been a lot of discussion about, but within open source communities, of course, this is something they've dealt with. So how do we bring those across? And I believe this is the last one, open source licensing, which of course is always a big issue. And I was wrong. The last one is configuration management and sustainability of open source. So how do you know that you can rely on a product that's put out there? And the room was small, but the afternoon was very productive. So thank you all for listening.
Well, I guess I'm what's standing between you guys and the conclusion of the conference.
Yes, I did. It was between that and the lunch.
So even better this time. We were session 11F. We were rather well attended. The purpose of the workshop itself was to inform the participants, both panelists and audience, about the enterprise developments that were going on across the U.S. government. And so the idea was they would present what was going on with their groups. They would present at the very end what their top 3 challenges were within the groups. And then the last half was to get feedback and exchange from the audience regarding those challenges. And it was quite a discussion. These were the presenters and panelists, although I must confess, I did stack the audience. You see people here, Dan Smith, representing the GEMSEC equities, and also NASA itself. NASA as a group is talking about forming an enterprise across NASA and the feasibility of doing that. Eric Gottsall is NOAA. He was representing the NOAA equities in their ground systems and their enterprise building there. Colonel James Plano, who represents the EGS equities within the Air Force. Nancy Holt was our representative for MMSOC and representing those parts. And Brad Kazort, he's Harris. He's the chief systems engineer for OS Comet. However, he was representing the OMG Space Domain Task Force, which gave us an industry view and input into what was going on. In addition, in the audience, we had folks from Neptune CGA, which was the NRL equities. We had ESA and several other groups that were very active participants there. And we're grateful for all of you for coming out and helping us out here. Well, these have been key findings, but these in and of themselves were well worth the price of admission. It's a compendium of challenges that are being faced by the different groups as they build their enterprises. First group centers around ground enterprise and specification definition. I'm not going to go through all of these things that you see in the chart. I see our timekeepers are breathing a sigh of relief at that, as are the rest of you collectively. But the things that we ended up finding out were, as we go through, and you'll see it in the conclusions, one size doesn't fit all. There is no right answer for every enterprise that's out there. And so, but one thing that was pointed out was that is of specific interest, you need to understand what your goals and why are you building the enterprise? What's the end goal? I mean, is it to save money? Is it for efficiencies? Is it so that you can fight a battle in space? What is it? What are you trying to do? And once you've got that decided, then things can start to fall into place and you can answer some of the questions that you see here. Questions such as push or pull. Again, should we make people in the enterprise use this, or should we just have good products for them to use and let them choose to use it or not? Technology, processes, and/or people and awareness. Which of those are the most important pieces there? We'll discuss that in a second when I get to conclusions. Gaining sustained leadership support. That's always a challenge, especially in the government and especially on the military side. Every 2 years, people are pretty much rotating out. How do you keep the fire going? How do you keep the emphasis there? Maintaining acquisition agility in a government acquisition paradigm. That almost seems like an oxymoron, but there are ways of being able to do things, and there were some excellent suggestions made. So in conclusion, challenges are similar, but as I said before, no one size fits all. There was a lot of thoughts and opinions and other views that were presented there, which was a very, very rich part of the workshop, because not only the panelists were able to hear what was going on, but so were the audience members. And so there was a lot of exchange that went on there, and a lot of very good and very different viewpoints were raised. Choices are really organizational and goal-driven, as I mentioned before. An interesting point that was brought up, which a lot of people had not considered before, was the fact of having a common, consistent presentation layer to help insulate operators from the changes that are occurring, as I put there, under the hood, change out of engines and other types of parts there, or across the programs as you're experiencing transformation. One of the key issues that you face as you start to transform your enterprise is the fact that, especially if it's a heterogeneous enterprise, a lot of different command and control systems, which means a lot of different display systems, are going to change. Well, that puts assets at risk. How do I minimize that risk up front? Coming up with common displays that you use consistently throughout your transformation is a way of doing that, and that, again, insulates the operators from what's going on underneath. So whereas for many groups that used to be something that was a lower level, nice to have priority that we'd take care of later, perhaps it should be considered to be being done earlier in the transformation. And last but not least, while technology and processes are important, are important pieces that are there, for the most part the technology is there to do it, processes can be put in place. It's the training of people, and that's both on the government side and on the contractor side, and how do you get them to think enterprise as opposed to stovepipe? And that's the toughest nut to crack. Anyway, thank you very much.
The next session is even more impressive because, from 4 days of conference, of workshop, so now Sam Cantrell is going to, he has been, digesting this presentation for us, and then he will present us the workshop summary. Sam.
Thanks, Sue. This year's conference, the theme for this year's conference was embracing the rapid rate of change. And I believe our community, as you can see here, our community is at a turning point, that the level of change that we're facing is so great. And I just wanted to say one thing I noticed was how the community has really stepped up and embraced the change here. And because we're able to take on the challenge of this, and you could really feel the enthusiasm and the excitement of everyone. I'd like everyone to take yourself an opportunity to give yourself a hand for stepping up to this. I think this was a really good conference. I mean, I've been doing the summary here a number of years, and this was one of the most exciting conferences, I think, and a lot of the topics here were very good. So again, we have the challenge of change. And as was mentioned, the general mentioned that space is a congested, competitive, and contested environment, one in which governments are allowing more and more access into space, and we're seeing some of their non-governmental players starting to get access into space, if you will, amateur space. And so this is making things even more challenging. The current architectures that we're all working with are based on budgets that don't exist anymore. They were big, expensive systems with big, expensive budgets. And as we're moving to this new environment, the challenge here is to move to a smaller, lower cost, more risk tolerant sort of an environment, a more agile environment, if you will. So that's really the sort of the crux of the challenge that we're facing. You know, and then we're also coupling with that the needs of the community, as highlighted here, getting information to the warfighters at the speed of need. And it's not just warfighters, but everyone that utilizes space. The turnaround times, the cycle times are getting much shorter, and information becomes stale a lot quicker. So we need change, not tomorrow. We need it now, not tomorrow or next year. So we have to find a way to bring that change so that we can utilize it as quickly as possible. So I guess looking back at the budgets and the systems we have, is the rate of change faster than the acquisition cycle? We do have a commercial world out there that seems to have solved a lot of these problems. And if we want to leverage that commercial world, we have to learn how to embrace the rate of change in the commercial world. So we have to learn to play in their sandbox if we want to take advantage of them. And also, we have to be able to deliver change without too much disruption. Now, change is always disruptive, but we have to find a way to make that disruption palatable so that we can accept the change. And also, underlying everything is security is becoming more and more a central thread in everything that we do. So how do we bake security in from the beginning? Okay, so one of the solutions that we have, or one of the approaches, is to have a more agile development. And I think that was pretty obvious from seeing all the presentations at the conference here that the current acquisition models that we have don't easily support an agile environment. The traditional sequential governmental acquisition model is not agile friendly. And the traditional sequential governmental review model is also not agile friendly. And having the tighter production schedules, the quicker turnaround times do require a tighter adherence to standards. So, and also someone mentioned, I jotted a note down here from the panel, that move from a more requirements-based acquisition to a need-based acquisition. So that transformation there and how that's going to get done is something we all have to look forward to. Automation is a key factor in making all this work together. And I think it was obvious that we need to define automation at the beginning, up front of a mission, rather than asking, well, what can we automate when we're on the back end? So just like security, you have to sort of bake it in from the beginning. And this was a theme that's come up in years past, human in the loop versus human on the loop. So how the idea of the transitioning away from people-driven systems to an automated one. One of the quotes, assisted automation is tough, unattended is tougher. And the takeaway from his talk about that was we have to engage in extensive data validation and integrity because there's not a human in there watching over everything. Automation deals with it, fights operator boredom, but when a system goes lights out, how do operators retain their proficiencies when the anomalies pop up? And also lights dim versus lights out. The stakes are high here because enabling automation actually saved this one instance. They said $20K a month, 40% reduction in labor, 92% reduction of daily task time. So the rewards here are huge. Another approach is virtualization. Virtualization is challenging in and of itself. How are we driving away? To make virtualization work, it also needs to drive away from large monolithic systems to get down to more bite-sized pieces. And how can you have this in the current contracting environment? Which is all set up for large pieces and large monolithic systems. And the quote here was, cost is too high to build small. So it turns a lot of people off trying to get in this business when the cost overhead is so high. So let's see, also under there is the security. How do you secure how do you secure a virtualized environment so that it works in a secure manner? An interesting thing that was brought up here, sort of a dichotomy here, was the European approach. Nestor brought up about buying ground systems like ordering pizza, which I thought was nice, and that versus the too big to succeed faction. So obviously we look from the first bullet here about the cost of a ground system can be the driver in a space system higher than the space asset or the launch vehicles. The European approach seems to be collaboration enforcement, and that's the key to their paradigm. Essentially, they provide open source that they build. They make it available to everyone for free, but it's required that you use. And the quote there was, selected technologies, not necessarily best in class, but ones that will work well together. And contrast that with the too big to succeed faction, where their sort of takeaway was the true measure of a standard success is not that it is required to be used, but that it is used when it is not required. Standards can be produced only when there is a consensus. Risk drives a choice of standards. So it's sort of the opposite solution. So do you allow sort of the standards and the paradigms to develop organically and sort of happen naturally, or do you look at it from a more top-down approach and say, look, here's some things, it may not be the best, but we're going to produce it, we're going to make it free to everyone, use it. So it's two different approaches. I think it's very interesting to sort of see how that's going to play out. So a lot of the things that were mentioned at the conference, a lot of evolving solutions. We heard a lot about RESTful, JSON, containers, cloud, the public-private partnership. It's costly not to do it, so it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds in the coming years. Open source moves money around and has the potential to save money. And also here, focus on mission effectiveness rather than mission success. So sort of recasting how what is success in a mission. And finally, this was my sort of favorite slide from the conference, the little tidbits, things that you hear around the conference. Flexible requirements does not mean no requirements. I like this one. If you wait to the last minute, it only takes a minute. Also, I like this one. Gmail is our ground system, literally. And change, as in don't change my system. If we had an endless pot of money, this would be much, much easier. I think that kind of goes without saying. And this was mentioned a couple times just recently, silos as a service. So maybe there's something to this, and we should look into this silos as a service paradigm. Also, limitations can actually add value. Don't make up a new standard when one already exists. Maybe it isn't a requirement if we can't afford it. 90% success overall, 100% on a good week, but it's not always a good week. Ground systems are very complex, just like playing Jenga. And build versus buy versus grab. And that concludes my summary here. And I'll have Rick up to close the conference out. Thank you.